Hello, my name is Owen O'Neill. I'm a principal consultant with Palantir, and today I am going to talk on the topic of taking control of your business plan data. Today I'll give an introduction to Palantir, who we are and what we do. Then I will talk a bit about the problem faced by the upstream energy industry with regards to the data management challenge. And then I'm going to run through a little demonstration of the PalantirDATAFLOW application and how it can help to meet some of these challenges. Palantir was founded in 2002, and in the 13 years since, Palantir has grown to be the leading provider of integrated dynamic planning solutions to the upstream energy industry. Here are our global locations. You'll find Palantir in many of the key oil and gas hubs around the world. And these are some of the clients that we are proud to work with. And you'll see a range here from smaller independents right through to the super majors. Palantir offers a range of software applications. They combine together into an integrated planning platform, which we call Planning Space. I'm going to talk today about the PalantirDATAFLOW application, which is our data management solution. And built on top of this data management platform, we have a range of analysis tools. And we have two versions of this suite. We have the CX suite, Corporate Economics, and the AX suite, Asset Level Economics. Palantir Cash is our economic modeling and forecasting tool. Palantir Financials is a financial forecasting application. Palantir Plan focuses on portfolio optimization and visualization, and Palantir Reserves is a reserves reporting tool. Also in the asset and field development planning space, we have Palantir Resource, which is an optimization application. Complementing our software offering, we provide a range of services, which ranges from business consulting. So this would typically be consultants with a petroleum economics or engineering background, and those consultants will be placed with clients to help them on these business processes, so planning, economics, and so on. And our technical consulting group will focus more on software implementations, customizations. And these are some of the solutions that our software and services address. So we'll look today specifically at data management, and I've mentioned also economic forecasting and analysis, decision analysis, portfolio optimization, and financial forecasting. The data management challenge is something which would be familiar to knowledge workers across a range of industries, not just the upstream energy industry. And it is typified by having large volumes of data, often in disparate systems around the organization, which may have ownership by different functional groups. And this information needs to be collated and aggregated together for analysis in the decision-making and planning process. And an inordinate amount of time can be spent on simply deciding what information is required and then gathering this information together, rather than the actual value-adding analysis and decision-making process. And some studies, including one in the Journal of Petroleum Technology, supports this view, which is that many upstream professionals spend more than 50% of their time on the data gathering phase, gathering, cleaning, and formatting that data for analysis routines, rather than actually performing the analysis. And what we're going to look at today is how we can speed up some of these data gathering processes through having a single consolidated source of information for planning, and looking at data quality. How can we ensure that the data is fit for purpose? So this slide shows the data management challenge specifically as it relates to upstream business planning. And what we can see here is that there are many cross-functional teams that supply information required for our business planning. And as the number of network points between these groups grows, so does the risk that data corruption, data loss will occur. And often what we find is that these islands of information, so different groups that have their own expert systems and their own means of storing and organizing their data, that between these groups the information is transferred in quite an ad hoc way. So it could be by means of Excel files, often via email or network folders. And it's difficult to audit, to trace down the most up-to-date information. And a lot of time is spent going back and forth, reconciling information between different tools. I had the experience myself of performing an economic evaluation for a client using a certain set of production profiles, which had flown through a similar workflow as you can see here on the screen. And when the results of this analysis were presented, it was discovered that the production profiles had since been updated while the analysis was taking place, and so many hours or days have been wasted using obsolete information. So what we will try to do using DataFlow, here's the same slide again, is to have a single consolidated database application that all of these functional teams can interact with, and we will have an evergreen, up-to-date source of information required for the analysis and the business planning function. So what is Palantir DataFlow? Well, it is a centralized database application that allows cross-functional teams to manage the life of field upstream planning data to support some of our key decision-making processes. With that, I'm going to jump into a demonstration of the Palantir DataFlow application, and we're going to look at how DataFlow can help to minimize some of that data gathering and validation overhead, and how it can help us to improve the quality of the data that we have for our analysis. So we'll take the example today of Jane Doe, who is the country planning manager for the UK in our Palantir oil and gas company. And Jane has scribbled down her to-do list for today. She's noted that it's the submission deadline for the business planning data for the UK. And as the country planning manager, Jane is responsible for approving that the data that has been provided by all assets is correct. And the first thing that she needs to do is to validate that all mandatory project attributes and information have been entered and are up to date. She needs to run a final check on production profiles and costs and make sure that that is as agreed and approved by the UK planning group. And finally, she will submit this information to the global planning team. And at the end of the day, Jane is hoping to walk the dog. DataFlow can't currently help Jane with that specific problem, but we're hoping that through smart data management, Jane can maybe get an hour back at the end of the day to enjoy the sunshine and walk the dog. So now let's have a look at the DataFlow application. So I've actually got two instances of DataFlow open here. In this instance, you can see down the bottom right corner of the screen here, I'm logged in as Jane Doe. I also have another instance of DataFlow open where I'm logged in as the Global Planning Manager, and that's myself, Owen O'Neill. So I've given myself a little bit of a promotion. And you'll see right away that using permissions in DataFlow, we can limit what users see according to their organizational role. So we can enforce data ownership and confidentiality using permissions. So as Global Planning Manager, I have access to all countries. Whereas, go back to Jane Doe, Jane sees only the United Kingdom. Okay, so Jane's first task was to validate that all attributes have been entered correctly. And let's just have a look at a sample project in the UK to see exactly what information we're capturing about our projects here. So in this Balamory project, you see in the overview tab here, we have a number of attributes, so pieces of information that we use to classify our projects. And it's important that these are all entered correctly, because these will be used, of course, later on in the process to analyze our portfolio of projects based on different attributes. So for example, here, looking at the split between onshore offshore assets, looking at project lifecycle phase, so we can see here how this project moved through our different project approval gates, and we can see that it's currently in the operate phase. So in DataFlow, we can enforce the correctness of this data by using things like drop-down lists, and on our checks tab, we can use some quality assurance checks here to ensure that all mandatory master data has been entered correctly. So for example, here we can see the equity of 50% here. If I was to change that to 0, and I'll go back to my checks, we can see that it's telling us working interest must be greater than 0. So let's just put that back to 50. And we can have a look at some of our technical data that we've captured. So production, for example, we have an approved set of corporate variables. So liquid production, gas production, and some charts here that immediately can give us a view of our data. And we can see that UK have opted to enter periodic data with the first year monthly, and then switching to annual from that point forward. And again, we have some expressions here to capture, for example, total BOE volume. And if we look at some of our cost data, for example, on our op cost tab, again, we can see this mixed periodicity of data entry, and we can see that for every variable, DataFlow understands the metadata around that variable. So here we're saying that for the UK, our field op costs variable is captured in millions of pounds sterling in real terms, and we can change currencies or our real terms, nominal term switch for any of our input variables. And this metadata around each variable is what allows the Palantir applications to aggregate data across multiple countries that may use different currencies, different periodicity, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to close down this project and look at, we don't need to save changes, some of the bulk reporting and update tools. So Jane can run, for example, a data utility to check those project quality assurance variables that we looked at a moment ago. She can check those in bulk by running the data utility. So the data utility, we can create a preset to determine which variables we want to analyze, and we can then pull those into a grid. And what I can see here is that there's a couple of those checks which have failed. So for the Petrel West field, project lifecycle phase is missing, and we have a 0 working interest in Rosalind. So we know that those are going to cause problems for us later, either in our economic calculations because we're missing an equity, or in our portfolio analysis because we're missing some mandatory information. So we could go and open up those projects individually, but we can also edit data directly in our data grid. So we can pull out, I have another preset here which actually pulls those mandatory data attributes out into our grid. So let's do that, and we can see right away that in our Petrel and Rosalind field, here are our errors. So Rosalind was missing the working interest, and I consult my colleague in the Rosalind asset, and I know that the equity should be 60%. So Petrel West, similarly, I know this is in operate mode, so I need to fill that in correctly. Okay, so let's submit that. So we can say fixed mandatory attributes. And we are creating change records. Every time we update any of our project data, Dataflow creates a change record in that project. And this is really a key piece of functionality within Dataflow, which is that not only does Dataflow save the current state, so our current view of all of our projects, but it creates the full history of every change that we've made. So it's auditable. For one thing, we can see who changed what and when, and also it allows us to go back and pick out our plan really at any point in time in the past. Okay, so that's really point one checked off for Jane. She's validated the project attributes, and now she's satisfied with that. And the next thing I want to do is really just confirm that our technical data has been entered correctly. And I'm going to use another tool for that purpose, which is the Palantir Plan Visualizer. So this is one of the many reporting options that we have within the Dataflow application. This uses the Palantir Plan visualization tool embedded directly within Dataflow here. And what we're going to do now is to load our United Kingdom projects within a visualization template, so a set of visualizations which we have pre-configured. And as the country planning manager, Jane will be quite familiar with what production level she expects, roughly where the costs should be. And often visual reporting helps us to quickly eyeball that data, and we can determine if it's correct and as agreed. Okay, so we have some pages of visualizations here. We have our dashboard in 100% and our dashboard in net, which would have our equity applied. And we'll just have a quick look through some of these charts. So something immediately catches Jane's eye here in this CapEx tab, which is that the CapEx in 2017, 18, and 19 is enormously dominated by this Helen field. And I know that's incorrect. There shouldn't be. This is in millions of US dollars we're reporting here. And we can see that's 4.5 billion US dollars. So I know immediately that's not the correct CapEx for the Helen field. So you really want to drill down into what's incorrect here. So looking in Helen, I can see I've got a base project plus an infill well. And in order to drill down here, I can change the display by from field, for example, to project, because I want to see which one of these Helen projects the problem is coming from. And now I can mouse over again and see, well, actually this infill well has this enormous CapEx spend in these 3 years. So my next step would be to open up this project. Let's jump into the CapEx page and look at what's happening in 2017 to 19. And what I can see right away is that there's been an error in the data entry. I think it's probably that somebody has entered 14 billion instead of 14 million in these 3 years. So it may have been a copy and paste error from the source input system. And I can have a look at the history and see who has done what. And I can see that Owen O'Neill has been going and updating drilling estimates, apparently, and we can look and see exactly what's changed. And so I can give Owen a call and say, hey, what is it with these numbers? And we work out that indeed there was a data entry error. So I can go and fix these numbers here on behalf of my cost engineer back to the correct number, which should have been 14 million. I'm going to save, and I'll make a comment of fixed incorrect drilling estimate. So I've made my change, and I can actually reload my data in my visualizations here. And really what I want to do is just get confirmation now that this change has indeed taken place, and that I'm happy now with all of my estimates for costs, for production and so on before I submit. And I can see right away that change. So here the CapEx in 17, 18, 19 is now as expected. And we can take a look through some of our pages of visualization. So we have a production tab, for example, that will show us production rates, perhaps analyzed on the basis of different attributes. So we can see, for example, here how much of our production comes from onshore and offshore. And we can rapidly create new visualizations. So if I create a new visualization page here, let's create, for example, a column chart, and I can decide to show, let's look at net production rate, and I can choose to display by any of my attributes. And again, this is where we'll see the importance of ensuring that data completeness on these attributes. So for example, the life cycle phase, and I can see that this is my production split up by the maturity level of my different projects. So I can see how much of my production comes from fields that are currently operational, how much I'm expecting to add from different projects currently in different parts of their life cycle. And we can see here that there are no projects in none phase, so I've got nothing which is missing its life cycle attribute. So that's good. I'm now satisfied with the information that has been entered in all of my projects. So we're checking through these items pretty rapidly. I'm happy now with production profiles and costs. So the next step is to make a submission to the global planning team. And I can do this by means of kicking off a workflow. And workflows are a means to automate certain operations in DataFlow. And they could be things like applying a workflow, like in this case, to apply a revision tag. And a revision tag is a means in DataFlow to say, as of this point in time, all of my projects are complete and the data inputs are correct for this cut of the business plan. So now I want to apply a tag to sort of make this an official version. And we need to start a workflow for that, which is the business plan submission workflow. And the goal here is to apply a revision tag BP 2015 V1. So we start the workflow, and the document goes into pending state. And as the planner for UK, my role now allows me to submit this document. So I submit it for approval, and you see now it's moved to submitted state. And we can do this document by document, or we can do it, as with many things in DataFlow, we can use a bulk tool. So I have a workflow utility. So you can see here my Helen infill is in submitted state, but I can also just filter to UK projects. I can also start a workflow for, I can leave out Helen infill and start a workflow for all of my other projects. I can now see that we have all of these projects in pending state, except for Helen. So let's move all of them to submitted state. So now all of my UK documents are in submitted state. And we can configure workflows to do things like send emails to the approver. And now as Jane Doe, there's nothing more I can do. I don't have permission to approve submitted documents. So now I'm going to come back to my other instance of Dataflow, and here I'm the global planning manager, Owen O'Neill, and I may have received an email from the system telling me that UK projects have been submitted. So what I'm going to do is look at the workflow utility, and I can see all of the documents in submitted state. And as I'm happy with Jane's work, I can go and do my own checks first, but assuming I'm happy with this submission, I will now move, so I have the choice to either approve or reject this submission. So I will approve it, and the application completes that approval. And the outcome of that is that for all of my UK projects, the latest revision will now have a tag applied, and I can report against that tag either within Dataflow or moving it to one of my analysis applications such as Palantir Cache, the analysis application. So this is even if other users go on and make further updates, the revisions as they are now have this tag applied. One other feature I just want to mention, which also relates to these processes of approvals and versions, is that we can have multiple hierarchy versions. So here in this drop down, we can see that in addition to the live hierarchy, where we're building our business plan, we can make independent copies of this hierarchy. So for example, we could have had a business plan 2014 final hierarchy, which we can archive off a complete copy of the hierarchy as it is at any point in time. And so, for example, in our BP 2014 hierarchy, we could see that we had actually many more UK fields. We may, for example, have divested some fields at the end of 2014. And so we want to retain here a sort of set in stone view of our plan as it was at a certain point in time. We could also use hierarchies for purposes like having for confidentiality reasons or organizational reasons, we may want to have, for example, our Middle East projects really isolated in a separate hierarchy. And we can do that here by means of multiple hierarchy versions. So really that's the end of this brief demonstration. Just to recap on what we spoke about today, we had an overview of the data management challenge which is faced by upstream business planning teams. And we really showed how Dataflow addresses some of those problems. So how Dataflow as a centralized collaborative platform can reduce the time spent by upstream professionals in gathering data, reconciling between multiple systems, and we can really refocus us on the analysis part and making better decisions, which is what adds value. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll leave it there.